Nothing in a portrait is a matter of indifference. Gestures, grimaces, clothing, even decor, all combine together to create a character. This quote by Charles Baudelaire, who was a poet and art critic in the 19th century, shows us why every detail of the portraits in this mansion is important. While most of the portraits in the mansion are of first ladies, I'd like today to introduce you to two gentlemen who are very significant because they were painted by a very famous Missouri artist, George Caleb Bingham. Mr. Bingham was a legislator, a state treasurer, and an adjutant general. And many of his paintings actually reflect political life on the frontier. Two of his paintings of portraits are in this mansion. The first is that of Alfred Orr, who was a Rawls County resident. Mr. Orr's painting was donated by his granddaughter and originally hung in the family home. One day, a young boy hurled a rock that pierced the canvas of this portrait. Consequently, a cravat pin was painted on that spot later. I've often wondered if that young boy or his parents fully comprehended that he had damaged a work done by George Caleb Bingham, considered one of the greatest American painters of the 19th century. Another portrait of Mr. Bingham is the gentleman behind me, and that's Governor John Edwards. I'd like to draw your attention to the cape that Mr. Edwards is wearing, a very functional piece of clothing at a time when most transportation would have been by horse. And this coat protected the rider from the elements. Oftentimes the material was even waxed to repel water. Also, notice the Capitol in the background. This is the first Capitol that was destroyed by fire when it was hit by lightning in 1911. The fact that Mr. Bingham included this in the portrait of Governor Edwards is significant. At the time that this portrait was painted in 1844, there was a little bit of a political problem surrounding it. Construction had begun on the Capitol in 1837, and it was functional 3 years later, but still not completed when this portrait was done. Governor Edwards' task was to complete this Capitol. Many critics were trying to move the capital city from Jefferson City to another location, and possibly he and Mr. Bingham wanted to include this in the portrait to show this beautiful structure and how it was right to keep the Capitol here in Jefferson City. The building in Mrs. Roger Wilson's portrait shows you the comparison between the present-day Capitol and the first one. Mrs. Wilson's portrait is a watercolor, the only one in our collection. Her lieutenant governor husband became governor after Governor Carnahan was tragically killed in a plane crash toward the end of his administration. Artist Paul Jackson portrays her image in the mirror, perhaps typifying that the family could no longer look to the past, but had to look forward to enormous new challenges and responsibilities. There are some secrets in this portrait. And if you look closely, you will see the children's names, Aaron and Drew, painted on the tassels. Mrs. Wilson's father was of Irish descent, and so she has a little four-leaf clover painted on the wallpaper. On the mirror frame is a small bee in honor of her mother, whose name was Bee. And her husband's lucky number 23 is painted on the light fixture. Another form of art in the mansion is this beautiful walnut shadow box on the porch. It took over 600 hours to make this. It was designed and created by artists in Colombia and is actually in the shape of the mansion itself. On display in this shadow box are pieces of artwork done by various artists throughout the state of Missouri. These artists are elected to a group called the Best of Missouri Hands and are chosen to display their work here. These pieces are periodically changed and have included glass sculpture, metalworks, painting on glass, and Christmas ornaments. Needlework art is also found on the porch. This beautiful rug hanging on the wall was a bicentennial project of the Missouri Mansion Preservation. Each of the blocks here is stitched by a different Missouri resident, including a child and a man. And each block is a state flower. First Lady Mrs. Bond lived for a time in Kentucky, so she stitched the Kentucky state flower. The Missouri state flower, the hawthorn, is featured on the border.